intended to be, thank you, Kevin. So they're not really intended to have a ton of conversation, but I think it's important to level set and understand what the real value proposition underneath it is. And that means understanding both what VMware validated designs are and what Cloud Foundation is in context of that. Then I'll get in and then really go through the infrastructure and really hammer that message home for all the Covaris folks who were on the phone Monday morning in our all hands meeting. You heard Leon talking about lifecycle over and over again because he heard me hammering on it over and over again in December when we were out at state hospitals, basically trying to explain to them why they should care about VCF. And that's really, if you think about it, we're in April now. In December, they didn't even understand why VMware was pushing VCF as hard as they were. And they'd had a very difficult time providing a message around it that was resonating. So let me just get into it real quick. So when we talk about VMware validated designs, you need to understand that VVDs are really a reference architecture that VMware has done to have a complete view of what the data center is that's going to be standard and consistent. It's going to be based off a proven and robust infrastructure stack that, for the most part, customers are using today. And I mean, for the most part, they're using a lot of these things in place today, whether it's vSphere and NSX or vSphere and vSAN, or all three in conjunction, they're getting used. And the VVD itself has a broad range of ways you could go with it. The reason customers should care about VVDs as being the base of when we talk about VCF really boils down to talking about the interoperability and the extensive testing that goes into each of these releases that come out. It's not like VMware just says, hey, guys, here's the new stuff. Maybe it'll work, maybe it doesn't. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of validation that goes into saying, when you're going to upgrade a stack, here's the order, here's the sequencing, and there's a lot to it. And that's the thing, is that when we talk about these technologies, the more you add into the stack, the reality is that you're really going and you're creating chaos to an extent, because the more stuff you add on top, the more you have to go and validate and do interoperability and figuring out the what's compatible with what. That was the big value prop of the VxRail, right? It was, I don't have to think about what version of vSphere is going to need which drivers and which firmware, and how is it all going to work together, and how long is this going to take me to do. It was a prescriptive solution that solved a real challenge in just managing the life cycle of your vSphere infrastructure. And it was a huge benefit to being able to do that. And when we talk to customers about the VxRail, that's the point I want everybody in our field hammering home. It's about the life cycle. It's about not having to spend a week out of every quarter worrying about what firmware and drivers I'm going to need to do and figuring that out for my 10 different server fleets that I've got out there. Nobody wants to do that. They want infrastructure to be out of the way. And that's really what this is about. So I'm going to take a pause there. Does anybody have any questions before I move on from VVD? Silence is acceptance. Where the rubber meets the road on these things is when you start with VVD, and that's going to be your reference architecture. Where VCF comes into the equation is it's that next level up. It's going to take a VVD, and it is going to go and basically manage the life cycle of all of that infrastructure. And back in the day when I started on this stuff with ESX 2.5, all you really had to worry about was a little bit of driver and firmware, and mostly it was just ESX and vCenter. There really wasn't a whole ecosystem. Now you got vSphere, you got vSAN, NSX. Then you throw in the vRealize components in on top of it, and on a good day, that's a 2-week process to go and rationalize and figure out what you're doing. So that's where VCF really came into the picture, and why VMware is investing so heavily in it as a product, because it isn't just a collection of things they're selling together. It's a fully managed infrastructure stack that is able to not only handle the lifecycle capabilities of vSphere, but it also handles NSX. It can also integrate with the vRealize suite and have a fully consolidated lifecycle plan for upgrading all of those components in a way where you're working from a baseline that is known and good. And, you know, beyond just the fact that now you're giving people a week or 2 weeks of their lives back in terms of just real time having to figure this stuff out every time they want to go through and do this. When they have to go and engage support because there's other issues, it's also working from a much more common baseline point as well, which means that support's going to probably be an easier aspect unless you're hitting some weird, quirky little bug that's really corner case specific to something very specific in the environment that's happening. So there's a bunch of downstream benefits that come out from the platform. In terms of what's supported as of VCF4, and this VCF4 really just launched last week. It's been in the works for a while, and there's a bunch of changes that are coming with it. But the entire vRealize suite is part of VCF, just out of the box, pretty much now in terms of licensing and entitlements, unless you go with standard. And all of these things under a single pane of glass can now be managed, integrated, and have all of those sort of, I'm going to say those interwoven pieces where you have to typically go between 3 different interfaces to go figure out what's talking to what. It's all brought into a single pane of glass. So all the operational efficiencies that you hope to get from something where you have centralized lifecycle management is substantially easier in this world. The big piece of this that I just want to touch on, and I'm not going through every piece of the stack. I'm not trying to turn this into a, let's talk about every VMware product, but SDDC Manager is what I'm going to be highlighting today on the demo side of this. And what SDDC Manager does is it's the thing that glues all these products together, and it's the thing that understands all of the life cycles of everything. It's got the interop capabilities between things, and it knows that to go to VCF 392, if a 392 ever came out, here are the components I'm going to have to upgrade, and here's the order I'm going to have to do it. So I'm going to take a quick pause before I move on to the next slide, which is where we start talking about VxRail. Are there any questions or anything we want to dive into? Just high level on VCF? Don't be shy. Okay.
Yes, Dave, I think this is great, but I think from what I see, this is Fabian here, from what I see, there's a lot of sales reps on the line. So you're going to be going into kind of our positioning to kind of a C-level decision makers on how we position this, or is this what you're showing here? What they care about?
No, this is a KPSC. This is tech. This is, I was asked to demo VCF.
Okay, fair enough.
So yeah, we're still working on the C-level pitch. This was my understanding of this. Yeah.
This is Jeff Weitzenberg. I think this is great. I think, and you know, the team needs to understand what is in VCF. We use the term quite a bit. There's a lot in it. Yeah. And I think the one key kind of stepping stone I'm always looking for is, does the customer have to engage in the vRealize automation day one, or can they start with a VCF package with the goal of eventually getting into that self-service portal and all the automation built in? It definitely is a much heavier lift. In fact, so if you could comment on that, I think what you're touching on is great. This is very complex, a lot of moving pieces. We appreciate it.
Yeah, so to answer that specific question, Jeff, that's a really easy answer. So the answer is that everything you see on the left side of the screen, so SDDC Manager, vSphere, vSAN, and NSX, those are the only components you need to deploy as part of a VCF implementation. All of the vRealize, so part of VCF 3.9 included Log Insight out of the box. However, my understanding with 4, and I haven't actually done a 4.0 deployment yet, is that not even Log Insight gets done out of the box now. So you would deploy all of the vRealize components as a follow-on action after you've gotten your VCF stack up and operational. VRA is definitely not part of the base deployment, guaranteed.
Outstanding.
Does that answer?
That's an easier position to get your foot in the door with, I think, than the best. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So that's the way, if you think about this slide specifically, think of the left hand as what you're going to, those are key pieces. Everything on the right isn't optional, depending on what license and edition you've got of it. Anything else before I move on? Okay. So the question then becomes is that if VCF handles your lifecycle management, what's the difference between just rolling VCF, say, on ready nodes or, you know, whatever hardware you want to roll it on? And the answer is that you still have to deal with all of the hardware lifecycle management that comes with upgrade. VMware finally got around to figuring out some level of a lifecycle management framework for vSphere 7. However, it's limited to both Dell and HP initially, and it's a 1.0 product. I don't know that I trust it, frankly, at this point. Plus, I don't think the adoption level is going to be deep enough, and I'm guessing it's a pretty janky process. So I still believe that from a lifecycle management standpoint, VxRail is by far the best approach to this, particularly in the VMware ecosystem of the world. And what happens is that when you deploy them together, you get all of the net benefits of the VxRail platform and the fully integrated lifecycle management of both the hardware and that core software, which in this case, we'd be talking about vSphere and vSAN. And then you roll in SDDC Manager on top of that, and then you get for NSX, you get an integrated lifecycle view of the entire stack in one place. So basically what happens is that SDDC Manager would be controlling that entire lifecycle framework. So you don't have to go to 3 different views to see things, but the two products work together hand in hand to deliver sort of that whole holistic view of what your overall life cycle is, and you have a pretty well integrated story. The only other thing I'm going to mention, because I found this out last week as I was building a reference architecture for a customer, is that for any organization that's remotely thinking about doing vSphere with Kubernetes, the only way to get it is by deploying it on top of VCF. You can't just go out and get vSphere with Kubernetes. So that's another big point of differentiation when customers are talking about things and trying to understand. VMware has a pretty set opinion on this, is that if you want to do anything in the world of Kubernetes, short of just running some basic containers, they want you putting NSX in. They want PKS or Tanzu Kubernetes Grid to handle that, because they want companies to be able to get the exact same benefits that they would get for VMs that have their either logical networking or security policy handled by NSX, to be able to extend that out to their containers. And this one kind of came as a surprise because of just how they are choosing to license it. But it is what it is right now, and that's pretty much it. And let me go get into the demo and just walk you guys through. So we're still running VCF 391 in the KPSC today, and that's mostly because we're still waiting on the VxRail 7.0 release to come out. That's going to have the vSphere support to let me rebuild this. So as soon as that's out, we'll be undergoing a rebuild, just to get everything up to the latest code of everything. So before I get into the demo and showing you guys how this all kind of stitches together and works, any questions I can answer or anything that I can clarify on? Fair enough. So to give you guys a sense of what goes into a fully deployed Cloud Foundation stack, this is the list of the VMs that have been stood up in just getting to the point where we're able to start pushing VMs out to our workload cluster that's right here. It's a non-trivial amount of stuff that gets provisioned out today. In total, there are 27 technically VMs. You could look at it that way. It's not a particularly small set of things that has to get done here. And I like to start from this just to level set and understand that we are talking about a fully orchestrated stack that gets provisioned. Yeah, Chris, I'll make it bigger. So, is that better? So, yes, a lot of VMs that get done. And the cool thing about this, though, is that this is a fully automated deployment. So you basically have a config workbook that you fill out, you feed that into an appliance that you deploy, and the whole thing automatically gets provisioned. There's good and bad to that. As anybody who's ever dealt with a VxRail deployment knows, if you don't have things properly in place and set right, your VxRail deployments are going to have a really bad day. But if things are in good working order, things tend to work kind of like magic. So it's a lot of fun. So here we go, looking at SDDC Manager. We've got our management domain cluster, which we're just looking at, and then we've got a single workload cluster. I'm going to start by just, and again, this comes down to thinking about things from a lifecycle standpoint and trying to just get people oriented around it. When we talk about a platform where everything is aware of everything else and just it's a fully orchestrated view, the only way you can really do something like that is if you have something that understands all of the pieces that are tied in and stitched together as part of that overall infrastructure stack. So that's the thing about this. As this is all getting provisioned, since it's all getting done from a common platform deployment, you have the ability to be able to feed those things in and stitch them together and say, hey, this is what my management workloads look like, and this is how they integrate, and this is what they talk to. And when we sat there and we said, let's just say hypothetically we had an available update ready to go, which I don't right now. There's a bunch of stuff that we're going to look at from a pre-check standpoint, which I'll get to in a sec. But here's like, to me, here's like the most important thing we can show a customer around why they should care about VCF. It's this right here. Here's my SDDC Manager version. Here's the version of vCenter. My platform services controllers are all at that baseline. I've got my lifecycle manager for VRA Suite. It's running at this version because this is the version tied to that version of the DVD. Log Insight, vRealize Operations. Since this is VxRail, it's aware that it's a VxRail cluster, and it knows what version of VxRail is running on that cluster, which from an overall integrated standpoint is a big deal. Then you also got all of your NSX versions, which right now we're still on NSXV because of 3.9. But again, all the versions are set there and they're all integrated tightly together and they're aware of it. And that becomes a big deal when you need to go and run pre-check to say, hey, let's go take a look at what would happen if I had an upgrade ready to go. The other piece of it is that when you have a big solution that where everything is just situationally aware, you get a bunch of checks that it knows to go to check to validate that your upgrades are actually going to have a higher level of success or higher percent or higher likelihood of success. There are no guarantees in life, and I would never go and tell anybody that there are guarantees. But if we had to go and manually check all these things, even if I went and I built automation to go and check all these things, this would still be something that would take days, if not, it would take days to probably build the check, and then it would probably take me another couple of days to just debug and make sure it all works. Why would I go through that if I can just hand it off and let this thing do it for me? And that's kind of why I like to focus on the lifecycle capabilities, because I really think that's where the value in all this is, in figuring out how to do all of it. So like in this case, it'll tell me that this needs to be checked. So it won't actually let me go and run an upgrade on this until the health check comes out completely clean. So that's actually pretty good. I only had one failure. So like, to me, this is where the magic in what VCF is. And this is the stuff that organizations really care about. And the reason they care about this is because you have to I think about this in terms of like, how long would it take me to go do all of this if I just went and did it myself? And that's the thing about it. It's like, how long, I mean, realistically, how long would all of these things take to run if I had to go and do this for every cluster I needed to do it for myself? And that's the thing about it, is that like, this is a lot of work to do, and this is what you're really paying for at the end of the day. I don't think anybody particularly finds the concept of workload domains to be a thing that's particularly revolutionary or eye-opening. Like, I need a separate cluster for something specific, then I can go build a cluster for that thing specifically. There isn't a ton of value in that, but there is a ton here on this side of the house, where you've got all of these checks that happen, you've got a fully managed lifecycle that occurs, and then you also have a single pane of glass to see the history for that particular infrastructure. What updates have been happening? What hosts would be impacted by it? Which clusters are part of that? And then also, this is something that gets lost in the shuffle a lot of times, I think, too, is for SSL certificates, which is the bane of, I think, anybody's existence that has to do this from just an operation standpoint. This is fully managed as well by VCF. So that's another thing that you're taking off the plate of a very overworked operator to not have to think about, because it's going to be centrally managed within the stack for that particular region. Are there any questions or anything anybody wants to dig into when we talk about lifecycle and all of that?
Steve, this is Leon. Hey, Leon. So I see like right here on the security tab, like I see the VxRail Manager. It's like a security certificate status. So that kind of shows the integration of VxRail within Software-Defined Data Center Manager. Is there something similar in the update tab as well? Because I know like it goes through all that pre-flight.
Yeah.
But is there like an explicit integration with VxRail there?
Thank you. Yeah, VxRail Manager right there.
Okay, cool.
You can SSH to the, because it's the credentials are getting managed from within SDDC Manager at that point. So like, if we went and manually did a VxRail update, we'd have to go provide like root credentials and all of that. That all gets provided out of here now. You don't have to think about it extensively.
Steve,
yep.
Given just Leon, now Jeff Weisenberg here. Given your success at the hospitals, congratulations, by the way. Can you comment real quick for the group as to what was the value drivers, the decision makers that the state hospitals focused on during the campaign, and why we were able to win this deal?
Jeff, as you know, you and I worked on state hospitals years ago, right? So this has been like multiple. Yeah, we did. You know, there's multiple campaigns. Like we had the initial win with VxRail, right, in fiscal year 18, and then the next year, last year we did the remaining sites, and then they were looking to do a large data center consolidation and modernization project, and they're looking to build a hybrid cloud model of doing things, and they want to operate their own infrastructure as if it were cloud. They want the operational model. So that was one of the really big driving forces. And VCF, it made sense to leverage that technology because they're looking at things like NSX. They're already implementing NSX. They're doing VRA. They're doing vSAN. That whole stack that like Steve was showing earlier on, like for lifecycle management, like they're managing that now. And they have so many moving pieces. And so Steve actually did a great job. Like we went in there together and we worked closely with VMware and Dell. But basically, we went there with our standpoint, like this is the value right here is lifecycle management. And they know firsthand the complexity that goes into managing all those components. I mean, they're trying to deploy VDI. I mean, they have problems all the time just trying to keep everything in sync with one another. So lifecycle management was definitely the driving factor. And that's what we made sure to like kind of drive home too.
Yeah, and I mean, the deck I went through before I got into this, Jeff, is kind of basically, for the most part, the slides we used when I went in and talked to them. And basically, I think we were in there for about 80 minutes, Leon, right? I think it was about 80 or 90 minutes. And
Yeah.
I basically said that if you guys don't understand what this is, by the time by the time we're walking out of the room, I have failed. And we never actually got past lifecycle management because they had a lot of questions around it. But it was really, that was the focus, because the thing is that, and this isn't going to be specific to the state, this is something everybody is seeing everywhere. All IT organizations are being asked to do either more with the same, or maybe even doing more with reduced headcount. And the only way you can do that sort of a thing is if you get away from the word manual. You can't manually go and spend a week correlating versions of firmware and drivers for what you're going to do with your vSphere release. You can't. It's just nobody has that kind of time anymore. So that's why the message I've been giving to our field when I get asked about this, and when I talk about this, and I think, Leon, we had one call that was 45 minutes where I said life cycle every like 90 seconds on the call, right? When we were planning for that meeting. It's all about speaking to understanding and speaking to the pain that IT orgs are facing, which is, I need my infrastructure to get out of the way. I need my infrastructure to just work, and it can't be the thing I'm spending time on. And the only way you can get to that point is if you can deliver capabilities that balance the ability to have a very opinionated platform in those decisions under the hood that really form what I think of as, if we were putting this in art terms, as the easel and canvas to let them start painting a picture. That's the only way this works at the end of the day. And that's why I really like the overall approach of VCF sitting right on top of VxRail, because it really does allow the infrastructure to get out of the way so that people's businesses can go. So hopefully, Jeff, does that answer your question?
Yes, very much. Excellent answer. And again, congratulations to all. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really happy because we went through a ton of iterations of takes, and I'm going to say there were some hot takes in there, there were some cold takes in there, but we finally got to a place where everybody was on the same page about what made sense. And I think we're going to deliver a pretty robust thing that's going to help Saul and his team ultimately, at the end of the day, be able to focus on the things that matter. And the weird thing is that in terms of demoing VCF, it's a very hard thing to do because there isn't a ton here to talk about, which is why the lifecycle message really is the message. And that's where we're going to be, like, in terms of demoing this and talking about it, that's where we're going to focus. Because, like, if I had an upgrade to initiate here, nobody would be around to see the end of it, because it's not like you can speed up the time it takes for an upgrade to happen. Like, I can't do anything about how long it takes a host to reboot, unfortunately. But what I can do is, I mean, we can put things forward that make sense to at least show, what those key under the hood benefits are, and just show the breadth of all of the stuff that gets taken into account as part of this overall platform. It's a lot of stuff, but this particular piece just doesn't have a lot to it, which, in my opinion, to some extent, is actually probably a good thing, because can you imagine if like this was like super complicated and like you couldn't actually find anything and it wasn't like a really like clean and simple to understand interface? Like, this would never work as a product, because nobody would be able to, all their operational time would be just spent trying to figure out where to go to do things. So I'm actually happy to be able to say that, like, if we were going to go and do a KPSC on this, that it wouldn't probably be just on VCF. Like, that would be like our opening sort of salvo to say, hey, this is going to set the stage for a much larger conversation on the overall stack. But you really need to understand how this all integrates and works together and interoperates to get a true sense of what the actual story under the hood really is. Like, really, the only other thing I could show off would be like what the workload domain would be in terms of like what gets what gets done there. But it's basically, the interface is more or less the same. You can see that here on this side, we've got a vCenter here. We've got our clusters VxRail Manager here. And then on this side, we're running NSXT because that is the direction VMware is moving into for more of their products. So we've integrated this one to the NSXT. And I haven't done a ton with the workload domain. The plan is for us, once we get it all up to VCF4, to have it fully integrated with the entire vRealize stack. So we'll have VRNI in there, we'll have VRA 8.1, all the vRealize stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much at a high level. That's it. That's the pitch. The message is lifecycle, 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 lifecycle. So really simple.
Thank you, Steve, for your time on that. I thought that was really, really to the point. Fabian, I think you got the answer to your question. The life cycle and the time savings is really where this is at. So thanks, Steve. I appreciate you taking the time on that.
Yep, absolutely.
Are there any other questions that anybody has for Steve before we call it?
Well, I think there's an interesting point also to be made that, we need to be partnering with our VMware folks, because a large part of this is convincing the customer that NSX and some of these other capabilities are important to help their operations. Our team is pretty well versed when it comes to VxRail and the lifecycle management around that, but then coupling all the other capabilities from VMware is really where VCF comes into play. And I know Kovaris does a great job of being the glue between. We work closely with our VMware reps in large part, always could work closer, but it's pretty slick. And then I would imagine the same capabilities flow as customers adopt the vRealize suite.
Well, yeah, so from that perspective, just real quick, because there isn't much to show here, it's pretty straightforward. It's in this release, Log Insight is done as part of it, which is probably a net good thing. I don't think you should do NSX without Log Insight, but that's neither here nor there. But like basically, all you're really doing is the deployment isn't a particularly harrowing thing. All you really do is like if I did VRA, like let's just say hypothetically I did that, it's going to prompt you for the information it needs to do the deployment. And then it's actually going to go and do that based on the VMware validated design of the product. So it works the same way for Log Insight and VROPS is you input a couple of things, which is like if we were doing this as like a delivery exercise with a customer, that would be part of our design considerations as part of the implementation to understand what the scope of that needed to be so that we could ensure that it could scale and grow as customer need expanded. Because really the hope here is that what this should help drive is consumption as well as just capability, because I feel like half of the burden that comes with implementing something like this is just the gauntlet that really comes up with just looking at what it takes to do the implementation. If you present it as a single solid like stack that you're deploying, and that's going to be implemented overall with an easy button to add on, say, those more cloud management capabilities down the line. I think you can drive better consumption of the products because it won't feel like we have to go spend like 50K or 100K or whatever it is to implement VRA before we can actually start driving value.
Steve, can you talk to the value of how this would work with AWS or the public cloud at all?
In what respect, Kevin? How are we talking about AWS being integrated as part of this? Are we talking about like VMC on AWS, or are we talking about cloud native capabilities? Because those are two very different conversations.
Yeah, just a real high level about the things that are possible now with VCF to enhance the life cycle.
Well, so I would say that, so if we're talking VMC on AWS, I believe, at least in VVD 5.1 or 5.1, VMC on AWS could be leveraged as basically a additional availability zone or region that could extend your SDDC into public cloud for burst or whatever you need to do in that particular arena. When we talk about from a more of a native capability from a management standpoint, that's going to be more on the VRA stack, because you're going to be able to leverage VRA 8 as just an example to be able to provide multi-cloud capabilities around your provisioning and lifecycle of workloads. So whether they're going into a VCF Act SDDC or just onto some standalone vSphere cluster that's out there on a vCenter, or running natively in AWS or in Azure or GCP, you have a single place that you can go to model out your applications and deploy them. Similarly, for like VROPs, you can integrate VROPs with, say, AWS or Azure to get some of those management capabilities. But I need to go back and look specifically for the management capabilities with VROPs, what that actually means in terms of, let's just say, credible value is the way I'm going to choose to make that statement.
Perfect. Thank you. That was good. Any other questions that anybody else has?
Yeah. Hey, Steve. So this is James. Question. Of all of the folks that we work with, right, from an internal Dell perspective, you guys have the most thorough, robust implementation of this in your labs than anyone else, and we applaud you for that. You mentioned and you stated that there's little value in seeing you walk through the GUI and walking through some of the tabs and things of that. I respectfully disagree, and I think that there is extreme value in that. But my real question is, how does this team that's on the phone now engage you to have this conversation with our customers? Right? How do we get in the queue to have you do this with our customers as we try to work together to move deals through?
Yeah, fair enough. So James, just to clarify that point, I wasn't trying to say there wasn't value. What I was getting at was more that there isn't a ton to see in the interface itself, because it's intended to operate as a product that gets out of the way. So like it's like with VRA, we could run like an hour-long demo just exploring all of the different things without ever actually hitting on all three of the core services that are part of VRA, because there's just so much to talk about in there. There just isn't a ton to talk about here. So it goes pretty quick. You know what I mean? To that end, the way you get in queue, as it were, we've got our process internally. So you should be, from the sales side, work with your counterparts in our sales organization. They'll set them up, coordinate getting me on the calendar to come in and have that conversation and walk customers through it. I love doing these, frankly. I love getting in front of customers and talking and having conversations. To me, this is more about being able to spark a conversation than it is necessarily about even talking interfaces and all that. I think like Leon and I have probably done talking through like just the VxRail with at least 5 or 6 different state agencies in the last 18 months. And the conversations never really boiled down around the interface. It's more about I'll bring something up and show, and then we'll have like a 10 or 15-minute conversation about that thing and what it actually means applicably to that organization. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Perfect.
Hey, James, this is Scott. Can I say a few words?
Sure.
So just from my perspective, working with Leon and Steve, they were huge. I mean, there's something about a partner going in and talking about your solutions, the gear and the software, because it separates you from, separates us from talking about our own our own dog food. When they talk about it, they have other choices, right? Because of the partner, they can be, proposing a solution A or solution B. So that's one point. The other point is Leon and Steve know their stuff back and forth. It's amazing. Steve's knowledge of everything VMware is paramount, and it was paramount to the discussions at DSH to make the win. They were in there a number of times. If any of you have deals that are going that direction, I I just urge you to reach out to both of them, have them included. It makes a world of difference, validating what you're proposing and talking about. They're a great team.
Yeah. Awesome. And hey, I had a quick question as well. So any advice positioning VCF on VxRail for customers who, maybe a big Cisco shop and aren't super pumped about or completely sold on NSX yet?
Well, so are we talking about this as a Cisco versus ACI, or are we talking about this as a UCS versus VxRail, or both?
I mean, maybe a little, probably more the former, right? Like, cause I feel like in a lot of my campaigns, I feel like the linchpin in this is the NSX component, right? I feel like I got a lot of customers who are sold on VMware, sold on VxRail, but NSX piece is kind of the,
yeah. So, can I give you an anecdote and you can tell me if that anecdote is helpful for you? Because, we're amongst friends here. I've been working on a reference architecture for Pitney Bowes for their next generation data center for the last 2+ weeks. And I was given literally 2 constraints around what we needed to deliver around that reference architecture for them. Number one, the hypervisor was going to be vSphere and only vSphere. There's no need to talk about other hypervisors, which made my life a lot easier. And the other thing that our executive sponsor really wanted is he wanted solutions that were software centric, because they have a really large cloud spend right now with AWS, and they're looking for ways to normalize their operations around what they're doing in public and private cloud. So where we approached it from that perspective when we talk about NSX is that, number one, Cisco is extremely expensive hardware-wise. ACI isn't really, in my opinion, true microsegmentation because of the way it works from an architecture standpoint. And I am not a network engineer by trade. So that's where I have my boss, who's our field CTO, Russell Pope. He can get into the nuts and into the weeds of ACI versus NSX and why you'd want one versus the other. Really, the only place where I feel like ACI is actually a good fit and something that organizations should be looking at as their just de facto software-defined networking answer is when they have a bunch of just say legacy services, whether it's Power 9 or HP Nonstop or even some Spark. That's where you're going to need ACI because you're going to need the hardware fabric and the software together to make that interoperate. However, for what we're talking about here, and let's just be clear, VCF, this is a greenfield. You can't go and lay this down on top of an existing environment. You can't. It's a fully governed and managed stack. It's opinionated. You can't just go and take whatever you want and just start from there and just add other components and hope it's all going to play nice together. So the thing is that if organizations really want to get away from having to think about hardware and do all of that, realistically, the message is lifecycle, because your hardware fabric, they're going to still be having to manage all of those interoperability things with ACI if they want to go and do that. So the question really becomes is, like, where do they want to spend their time? Do they want to spend their time thinking about hardware fabrics and the versions and all the interop on all of that, or do they want their network to get out of their way and just leverage the software capabilities they need to get the job done? Is that helpful at all as an answer?
No, that makes sense. It makes sense. I feel like I just run up against sometimes like network managers and the network team that are, devout Cisco people who may or may not like NSX, whether that's rational or irrational, right? So, I think it comes down to maybe elevating the conversation with people who aren't necessarily like Cisco versus NSX. They're more like, I want a more reliable data center that's easier to use, easier to operate, easier to maintain, so that my team is, not doing those mundane tasks.
And here's the other thing to just consider. Again, it comes down to what requirements are and what they're trying to do. comparing ACI to NSX isn't even remotely a fair comparison, because all ACI can do, if we're talking about this, is it's going to deliver a fabric. It can do some of the microseg capabilities, right? But if you want other networking services, like say load balancers, or you want to leverage some of the other stuff that VMware's had come out recently, like distributed IDS and IPS, you're not getting that out of ACI, because it's basically, at the end of the day, it's a central fabric where all policy is governed from a central position instead of it being distributed. So the question is that when we talk about network services, is how efficient does your network need to be, and how close to the workload do you care about security be?
And I think that's really the point, Steve, which is this is more of an outcome focused conversation. This is, hey, what are you trying to achieve, Mr. Customer, to make you more efficient holistically? There are conversations that are going to happen at the nuts and bolts level where people want to pick apart the individual technologies, and I think that might be a different conversation than the one we would be having with this particular product. Is kind of how I imagine it. So.
Yeah, and there's nothing to say that I mean, we've had implementations where we've done NSX on top of ACI because we had organizations that wanted all of the net benefits that come with what you get out of NSX as a platform, but they did also still have to support legacy workloads and capabilities that were running on, old assets like mainframes. And they wanted to provide a more robust security posture for those as well. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. That's the other piece of it. It doesn't.
Cool. Well, thanks for the clarification. Again, sorry, I didn't mean to get us off topic, but that's traditionally been kind of my biggest challenge with moving some of the VCF stuff forward.
Yeah, and it's a totally fair thing to ask, and we're here to help in any way we can, frankly. So like it's all good. Yeah. Any other things?
Well, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. James, is there anything on your side that you wanted to close with?
No, yeah, I would just again say thank you very much, Mr. Kaplan, Mr. Cohn, and the entire Kavaris team for giving us this hour of your time. Again, we learned more about your capabilities using, again, our product solutions and technology, and how we need to continue to work together. So, kind of on the back end, I'll just make sure that process of engaging your team when we want to do this and actually have a presentation to our customers is smooth and flawless. So again, thank you again, and let's continue to do this, right? I think there's value in both of us, enabling both sides. We train you, you train us, and tell each other, how to make each other better. So I think this is something that is a good jumping off point for how we can continue to engage each other.
Absolutely. Like I said, I love doing this sort of thing, so I'm happy to do it. Like Kevin, when he came to me and said, "Hey, Dell's asking for this," I said, "Let's do it." He goes, "Hey, they're asking for 2 now." I said, "Let's do it." That's me. So I'm happy to do this as often as necessary. Get in front of customers, whatever you guys need. We're here to help.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, Kevin. Fantastic. Thanks, James, for setting this up.
Yes, we will. Anytime.